Good morning, and welcome to the Museum of the San Ramon Valley's virtual speaker series. I am Dan Dunn, the director of the museum. We are over a year into the programs in this virtual speaker series. Past presentations have included California's First People, Then and Now, the Alamo Pioneer Cemetery, and last month, the Pleasant Hill Soldiers Monument. We hope that you have enjoyed this speaker series. We have enjoyed bringing the programs to you. The Museum of the San Ramon Valley's home, the Southern Pacific Railroad Depot, was moved to its present location 25 years ago this month. This move saved the depot and provided a home for the museum. Ed Best will tell the story of that move. Ed has been a longtime museum volunteer and past president of the Museum Board of Directors, and for our purposes this morning, he was an eyewitness to the big move. Please use the chat window at the bottom of the screen for any questions that you have. Feel free to send the questions in at any time during the presentation, and we'll address them at the end. Fair warning, there's a video at the end of Ed's presentation. Stay with us through the end of that video, and we'll follow it with questions and answers. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Ed Best. Ed?
Thank you, Dan. Well, I hope everybody is enjoying this warm weather, and thank you very much for joining us. Let me get this started here by doing all the clicking that's necessary to get the screen started. Let's see here. Okay, well, hopefully everybody has that. As Dan mentioned, this month is the 25th anniversary of the Big Town event featuring the depot move from where it sat for over 100 years down the street to a new location. Now, after arriving at the new location, of course, it would be transformed from its current condition to a showpiece for the town of Danville and the San Ramon Valley as a whole. Now, this move represents the culmination of a lot of planning, yet is only the first step in a long trek to meet the final objective. Today's presentation will discuss only the move of the depot, not the extended effort to restore it to near original condition that you will see if you visit it today. That is another and much longer story. Now, we realize that slides and videos are no substitute for actually being there to get the full impact of this exciting day, but we'll try at least to tell you a bit about what happened and hope it offers some value. We'll divide this presentation into the areas you see here, which will include slides from photos that we are able to gather from the museum archives, and a professional video presentation produced by museum volunteers Tony and Wendy Cooper. We'll view the slides in the sequence of how all this took place. We'll look at the depot and its initial condition, talk a little bit about the preparation of the receiving site, and then a bit about preparing the town for the town event and the move itself, and then finally settling the new depot on its new foundation. Now, following the slides, the video will present a bit more of the history of the depot and a more theatrical view of the move day. Now, here you see the depot as it looked when it housed the Danville Feed and Grain Store. Looking at the right, you can see some of the additions which have been made over time. Aside from those additions and a few others you don't see, the building is pretty close to its original configuration. That's the good news. The big question, however, is what unknowns will you encounter as you try to move a structure that's over 100 years old? Now, getting the depot ready to move was not an insignificant task. All those additions that would not be part of the finished structure had to be removed. As you can see, those you saw to the right in the last picture are now gone. The exterior freight platforms could not be moved, of course, so had to be taken off the building. At the new location, the freight platforms would be rebuilt under modern safety and access codes. Now, these next two pictures show the depot just about as it was when we asked the movers to bid on the move. Keep in mind, you have something that's over 100 years old and built to different standards than we have today. The movers can walk through it, poke it in a few places, take measurements, and guess at its weight and stability. This particular structure was built as one of a standard design by the Southern Pacific Railroad. If you travel around California, you can see similar depot designs. Some of them are single story without the upstairs living accommodations for the station master. Others have freight rooms of various sizes. Here we have a two-story depot with a fairly standard freight room. Now, I mention all of this just to offer some historical background and some sense of what we are dealing with. It's the freight room that gave many of the movers we talked to a headache. If you look at this carefully, you see that the freight room is really just an attached shed. Its foundation is at a different height than the depot because its floor had to match the height of a railroad boxcar. There are no internal walls in the freight room for structural stability. That works when it's sitting on a solid foundation, but presents a problem for movers when they need to jack the whole thing up and move it across the ground on wheels. We talked to a number of movers and, as you might expect, got a wide range of estimates. Price was clearly a consideration. However, most of the movers wanted to saw the building in half and make two moves, the main building in one move and the freight room in a separate move. That was an emotional non-starter for us. So we went hunting for movers that would move the whole thing in one piece at a reasonable price. Fortunately, we found them in the Lopez family out of Salinas. Not only were they professional and very capable, but they were a delight to work with. They had 3 generations of their family involved with this project. And they were willing to work with us to make the actual move a community event for the town of Danville. Now that we've seen what we are going to move, let's look at where we're going to put it. I guess it's pretty obvious that the new site needs to have a foundation for the building to sit on. It's also obvious when you think about it that the new foundation cannot be completed before the building arrives, since you would have no way to lift the building up and set it down on the new foundation. So you first dig all the trenching that's necessary for the new concrete foundation and wait for the building to arrive. Then you hold the building in the air above the ditches while the foundation is constructed. The final step then is to lower the building onto the foundation you have just constructed and hope it fits. You can see from these pictures what the receiving site looks like when it's ready. A closer view of the foundation trenches showing their size and depth. Now, one might ask how the building can be rolled into position over a bunch of trenches. Here's your answer. The trenches are bridged wherever the wheels of the tow truck or the dollies under the building need to roll. And of course, you got to get over the curb. Well, now that we had a building ready, a mover engaged, and a receiving site prepared, we could plan for the actual move and make it a town event. Plans got underway to bring the community out for the exciting and once-in-a-lifetime event. Most folks had never seen a house move, let alone an historic building of this size, and we were offering the opportunity right in the center of town. Publicity got underway with all sorts of promotion. Arrangements were made for a local high school band. Vendors were invited and all excited to participate. This was expected to be a more memorable event. Of course, in the back of our minds, it was the hope that it would be memorable for its success and not an unfortunate incident. This, by the way, in case you had not guessed it, is a picture of a t-shirt we had made for the event. I still use mine. Of course, you can't move a railroad depot without tracks. I should mention for anyone watching who might be new to Danville, you are looking at the old Danville Hotel as viewed across Railroad Avenue from the site that will be the depot's new location. On the next few slides, you will see pictures of preparing the depot for the move and the move itself from various viewpoints. Here you see the depot still in its original location, raised up on supporting beams installed by the movers. Notice the original brick foundation exposed for the first time in over 100 years. Just as a side note, the 100-year-old bricks from that foundation were cleaned by volunteers and are installed around the base of the depot today to remind us of its original brick foundation. Check it out next time you visit the depot. Now, once you get the depot raised up, you put some wheels under it so you can pull it down the street. Here are 3 views of the depot up on the mover dollies, getting ready to pull it away from its original location. This is the front dolly that will be connected to the tow truck. There's one set of these dollies on each side in the middle, and another set on each side under the freight room. Notice what the movers had to do to accommodate the fact that the freight room foundation was at a different level than the main building. How stable does that look to you? Well, it worked. Oh, well, I should tell you a story about the one big surprise that caused the movers' dollies' wheels to sink into the dirt. As you will hear in the video, and I'll show you in the next slide, originally there were 2 chimneys in the depot, one in the middle and the other at the north end. In the 1989 earthquake, the north chimney fell down. At least the part that we could see did. It turns out, unbeknownst to us and the movers, this brick chimney started at the 2nd floor, but was hidden behind a wall. The only part that collapsed was the observable part above the roof. So we have the surprise weight of about 15 feet of hidden brick and mortar chimney, which, as you can see, became obvious later in the game. This is what deceived us. You're looking at the north end of the depot as we and the movers saw it when all this planning was underway. The roof had been patched where the chimney had been. So looking at this, would you suspect that the black patch on the roof held a chimney? You will see it reconstructed, by the way, when you visit the depot today. Now, in preparation for the big event the following day, the movers pulled the building from its original site out of that hole you saw earlier and positioned it ready to be moved onto the street for the waiting crowds. Here's one view, another view, and another view. And here we are. The building is parked at the edge of Railroad Avenue, ready to go on its journey the next day. And the move day arrives. Of course, you always need a police escort. This is the first unbelievable sight. A large building actually being pulled onto the street for a short journey north. Here's the start as viewed from the opposite direction, facing north on Railroad Avenue. Just in case you're wondering how the building can be maneuvered down the road and properly positioned.
Oh, this is office. Huh? Yeah, this is office.
Is somebody coming in here? Or we have it? Okay, I'll start again. In case you're wondering how the building can be maneuvered down the road and properly positioned at a new site, here's your answer. These ropes are used to steer the dollies. Well, all aboard. Here we go, slowly moving down the street with this audience watching. Of course, it needs to follow the tracks. It's a railroad depot after all. This gives you an interesting size perspective, man versus moving building. The move itself was exciting and thankfully uneventful. As the depot moved ever so slowly down the street, Danville's police were there to divert traffic from the road and manage the crowds as necessary. At one point, when the building was moving down the street, the police chief came up to me and asked, "Are you sure this is really safe?" Well, I had my fingers crossed when I responded, "Certainly." As a matter of fact, if you look to the right there in that amongst that crowd, I was there with my oldest son near me and with our new granddaughter on his shoulders. As the building approached us, he looked up at it and said, "Dad, I think I'm going to move back a bit." So far, so good. Another move of the crowds and the move from the parking lot that was then across the street. You know, it's clearly a different perspective watching a building move by you while you are standing in place. Well, we made it up the street. Now on to the new site. Now we switch to the other end of the depot with the towing truck attached. Although the trip so far went very slowly, you can see the crowds are still there. Watching how the movers are going to get the building properly positioned above those trenches is closer to its destination. You know, have you ever driven your car into a parking space intent on properly positioning yourself between the lines? Try doing that with a 100-year-old depot suspended above multiple dolly wheels. Again, so far, so good. The crowds are still watching. Look carefully at this picture and take notice that the depot seems to be leaning slightly. I'll take you back one photo so you can see the difference. Moving from a flat road surface to a sloped terrain. I'll leave it in your imagination as to what might be in the minds of the crowds as they were watching the leaning depot here. Well, thankfully it didn't tip over. Here we are slowly getting there. Now, just to avoid falling into one of those ditches, the Lopez family really knew what they were doing. Made it. The crowds are watching the final few feet of the move. Now, the next few days were involved with the process of making any necessary adjustments, removing all the wood used to bridge the trenches. And the dollies had to be removed and jacks installed to hold the building up until a foundation could be completed underneath. Well, there it is. Isn't she a beauty? Although most of the exciting part for the town was the move we just described, for us, that was only part of the story. Phase 2 of the move was building the foundation to match the depot hovering above, and then lowering it onto the new modern foundation. Here's where it gets interesting again. Remember, we started with a 100-year-old building that had been sitting on a simple brick and mortar foundation through a number of earthquakes, including the one in 1906 and the Loma Prieta in 1989. You might expect the building had twisted a bit during those 100 years. Exactly how much would soon be determined. Here you see the new concrete foundation under construction under the depot. The building remains suspended above with beams and jacks provided by the movers. The foundation is complete. The depot is still suspended with the movers, beams, and jacks. So now comes the final test. The movers return to lower the building. Will the depot fit on the new foundation? The answer, of course, is yes, even if we must encourage it a bit. For this part of our presentation, I've taken you through the story with some pictures retrieved from the museum archives, so you can have a basic understanding of what went on during the move process. Now I'd like to complete this story by showing you a video that will give you a more complete feeling of the excitement of the day. It starts out with a bit of history and then gives you a movie's perspective of the day's activities. I hope you enjoy it.
The Danville Railroad Depot moves to its new home on the corner of Prospect and Railroad Avenues in Danville in June 1996. It had stood on its original site 600 feet to the south for more than 100 years.
Southern Pacific built this particular building in 1891, and it actually was put in use January the 1st, 1892. John Hart sold the railroad 8.5 acres here for the Danville Platte. The passenger service ended in 1934, and it was kind of a fun thing to look back on. When it first came through, we had a separate passenger train and a separate freight trains. But as the years went by and then automobiles came into use, in the teens more so, so there wasn't much call for using the passenger train. So then they reached a point where they would just hook one passenger car onto the tail end of a freight train. That went on till 1934, and then they quit altogether.
In its heyday, the Danville Depot was surrounded by warehouses used for storing, loading, and unloading products for the ranches and orchards of the fertile San Ramon Valley.
So during the war, they hauled a lot of rock through the valley, and they would get it in Livermore in some of those big rock quarries, and they would haul them right from Livermore to here, and then right on through to Concord and on over to the naval base, where they used a lot of gravel. Some people call them rock trains, others call them gravel trains. They were steam when they first started. Right after World War II, then the diesels came in, about 1945. And at that time, a lot of train buffs, they knew that steam was going out, you know, so they formed these groups and went on their rail fan clubs, I guess they were called. And so we had 3 of those that went up and down the valley. 1947 and 1950, and I think one was in 1952. But the freight still ran up and down the valley till September 1978. About 1950, when Joseph Ramos and his son Joe took over this building to use it as a feed and grain store. They enclosed this whole platform like a room. So for years when you would look here, you didn't realize it was an actual platform. We had to take that off just recently too.
Joe, who bought the depot in 1957, made no major alterations to the historic building, and his feed store was a fixture in Danville until he died in 1987. After the railroad right-of-way was abandoned in 1978, the next decade was spent investigating the future of the depot and the land it stood on. In the late 1980s, the town of Danville purchased the building.
Problem was they didn't buy the land on which it was sitting.
The Museum of the San Ramon Valley, formed in 1985 to create a museum, began to focus on the depot as a possible site. Volunteers worked on cleaning up and preserving the building and gave tours to introduce the public to their future museum. Meanwhile, the problem of what would happen to the depot was debated in the town. Southern Pacific still owned the land and finally sold it to a commercial developer. The depot must move.
In July of 1995, the town of Danville agreed to lease us this really very expensive piece of land that they owned for 50 years for $1 a year. They also agreed that same evening to sell the building to the Museum of the San Ramon Valley for $1.
The Museum Board of Trustees swung into a fundraising campaign spurred on by successfully receiving a competitive federal grant. There were many surprises and obstacles to overcome.
This building, if you look at original pictures, had 2 brick chimneys sticking up, but no chimney going down to the floor in any case. So the assumption we had was that the brick chimney was built from the roof rafters up.
The north chimney fell during the 1989 earthquake.
When the building was first being moved, the movers were a little surprised at how heavy the north end of the building was. The ground was a little soft and their wheels sank down into it. We found that the brick chimney extended all the way down to the floor of the second floor. When you have about 15 feet of brick and concrete chimney, you can understand why there was a tremendous load of weight at that particular portion of the building.
On June 8th, the depot was moved from its foundations and made ready for the next day's journey. The museum volunteers prepared the scene. On the big day, the crowds came early and were treated to a carnival of old-time entertainment. And the journey begins.
I think it's cool and that it's going to be in a new location and that I hope it doesn't fall apart in the middle of the street.
This will be one location of the Museum of the San Ramon Valley. And we don't look at ourselves as entirely Danville based. In this railroad depot is really valley history. It will be a center for public use with a museum focus and a railroad kind of an overtone.
We're really proud of what the whole valley has succeeded in doing, in saving this depot and now moving it and restoring it. There were 4 depots similar to this, the Southern Pacific passenger freight depot, and they are painted in faded dandelion and gold yellow and trimmed with brown. And there were 4 on the San Ramon branch line. The one in Concord is gone, the one in San Ramon is gone, the one in Walnut Creek has been turned into a restaurant. This is the only one that will be in close to its original shape.
People who intended to spend just a short time watching the depot move stayed several hours witnessing the downtown landscape change before their eyes.
In a town that values our historical heritage, this event is a jewel in our crown. We are so excited to see the depot finally locating in a permanent place, and we hope that we're going to be able to refurbish it as soon as possible, so that all the children who are here today can come and visit the museum and learn about what's so wonderful and so special about our town and about the San Ramon Valley.
For the whole valley, it's going to be our museum, basically. We don't have one anywhere around here, so this is going to be really nice.
It's great to keep it in the town and have it for our children to see.
It's a part of Danville history, and it'll be wonderful.
The building, even though we had to move it, is still on Southern Pacific Station land. This whole acreage along Railroad Avenue was what was called the Southern Pacific Station. So the fact that we moved it 200 yards north kept it on its current compass points and also kept it on station land means that it is still in its whole historic context.
Here we are standing on the track side of the depot, and as you can see, the depot is still up in the air, having been deposited here by the movers temporarily, so that we can fix the bottom of the building itself and build the foundation onto which it will soon be lowered. The foundation is exactly below the building on the north side. The foundation is about 6 inches off the building on the south side. The reason for that is that the building is slightly turned right now. So if you can imagine what's going to happen as they lower the building onto the foundation, they're going to push it and straighten out that end so that the building itself will match the foundation.
Workers moved the building into place, section by section.
That part was good before, right? And then we can go over there, and then we're finished.
The southwest corner moves into place. The southeast still has a way to go. The depot building finally settles onto its permanent foundation.
So what was your heart rate like, Ed, during this time? Ed, you're still muted. There you go.
There we go. Sorry about that.
It's okay.
I couldn't get the cursor. Well, the heart rate actually was a little up as it was moving down the street.
I guess.
And once it was on the foundation, then it was more of a curiosity as to how are they going to get the south end corner put down. But it was really exciting because I was standing there right at that corner watching it, and then once it settled down, boy, there was a sigh of relief.
Yeah, no doubt. I thought that was one of the cool elements in the video, was watching that corner move closer and closer to the foundation corner.
Well, it was definitely a cool element because, you know, it was sort of like closing the book after the story is done. And you've enjoyed the story so far, but, you know, in a way, of course, we had another chapter to go, which was the restoration of it. But at least that one was in place properly.
So can you clear up for people who don't know where the depot came from? Maybe using some modern landmarks?
Where it came from? I'm
Yes.
not sure. Not sure what you mean. Well, it was, you know, as I mentioned earlier on in the presentation, the Southern Pacific Railroad built an awful lot of depots in California, and to a large extent they were a similar design. I know oftentimes they'll call them a number 7 or a number 10, and they just differed from one to another by, as I mentioned, some of them are 2 stories, some of them are 1 story, some of them had longer freight rooms. Others looked like just ticket offices rather than a freight depot. So there were a lot of variations in the design, depending upon what the need was at the time.
You mentioned that it moved about 200 yards north. So where would that be currently?
Oh, you mean who is on the land now?
Correct.
Lenardi's.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so it essentially moved the length a little bit more than the length of that current parking lot. But that was a good news, bad news. The good news is that everybody could see the start and the finish from you know, just walking 1 block. You know, the bad news, if somebody were really excited and wanted to see the whole thing go through town, well, that didn't happen.
So this next question goes along with something that a young lady says in the video. Out of the glass half empty category, I think, was there a plan B? What happened if it didn't make the move the way it did?
Well, I must tell you, there really was only one plan B, and that was if it didn't make it, then we were going to have to start looking for another location for the Museum of the San Ramon Valley. Of course, Plan A had a lot of variations associated with it, and one was what was the move going to do to the depot? I'll have to tell you that after it settled down in the foundation, I was one of the early ones that went inside just to view some of the what had happened internally, because you know, pushing that thing 6 inches may seem like a very small amount, but the building didn't like it. I can tell you, I heard groans and cracks when they were shoving that thing into place. Bottom line is we didn't have really an effective plan B at the time, because we were very confident this thing was going to happen.
So when you went inside, did you notice any separations? Did you notice, I mean, what did it look like that the building was protesting against?
There were separations, mainly in corners, as you might expect. And I guess the only thing I could compare it to is if any of us here have ever had a crack develop in the walls of their house, a very slight crack, that after an earthquake, as an example. Well, this had more than this was more than a slight crack, but it only happened in a couple of places. So there was really no serious damage to the structure at all.
And I think, as everybody knows, the Museum of the San Ramon Valley is mainly a volunteer organization. What kind of roles did the volunteers play in the move itself?
There were significant roles, and I guess I'd put them into 2 categories. Those that worked on the building itself to get it ready, as we showed, you know, an awful lot of work had to be done to rip off all the stuff that was not going to be moved, and just whatever was necessary to get the building prepared, aside from what movers normally do. But there was also the site preparation volunteers. We had, and by the way, a lot of the corporations and businesses that helped along these lines are listed in a plaque in the depot today. But a lot of the site preparation, the engineering for the foundation itself, and a lot of the technical work were done by local businesses who either volunteered their time or did the work with significant discounts because they were all interested in seeing this thing come to fruition.
Vivian wanted us to identify where we are, and I think that's mainly directed at where I am. So I'm on the second floor of the depot, which would have been the living quarters for the station master and his family. So if I look over my computer screen right now, I look at the Peasant and the Pear and the Danville Brewing Company across Railroad Avenue. And as you noted in your slide presentation, the view 25 years ago was very different than what it is now.
It was. And if you're looking directly across the street, across Railroad Avenue right now, out your window, if you would turn to your left and look at the north wall of the second floor, you see that the wall is pretty straight from the across the, until it joins the building, another room there. And instead of the wall being straight and joining the room wall, there was a section that was out that looked a lot like maybe a built-in something or other. That's where the chimney was.
Ah, okay.
And in retrospect, I guess we should have suspected something was behind the wall, but we didn't.
Hey, well, it was interesting though that once the upper portion of the chimney fell in '89 and the roof was patched, you probably really didn't have any way of knowing what was under there.
That's true.
And compliments to the Lopez family for taking good care of that move and the surprises that came with it. I actually have that ball cap up right above my desk at the moment. So
I couldn't compliment the Lopez family more. They were just about as terrific as anybody could be. I mean, they were capable movers. That's one thing. But the fact that they were willing to take the additional effort to do this safely with crowds around the building was wonderful. And also, as I mentioned, their willingness to move it in one piece. Hopefully, in my presentation, you get an idea of how difficult that was and why some movers really wanted to saw the building in half. But they were willing to do it. They were terrific.
Yeah. So the weather looked comfortable that day, as opposed to what it's supposed to be today. What was the weather like the day of the move in early June?
Dan, that was 25 years ago. It was sunny. It was good weather. As I recall, no breeze, no strong winds or anything. No, it was a delightful day in all respects.
Ed, I think that's it for questions. I really like to thank you for the presentation. And I got to tell you, folks, Ed put his heart and soul into giving you a good presentation today. He's been working on this for quite some time. So I would like to offer you a round of applause for your effort. And thank you for doing this morning.
Thank you.
And I would like to thank you all for viewing. If you missed any of our earlier programs, you can find them by visiting the museum's website at museumsrv.org. Today's program will appear early next week. Our next program will be on Thursday, July the 15th at 11:30. Architectural historian and preservation planner, Catherine Petrin, will tell us the history and give us some insights into the future plans for the old Mint building in San Francisco. If you like these programs and want them to continue, we ask that you make a donation by going to the museum's homepage museumsrv.org and clicking on the Donate Now button. The museum's also in need of volunteers. If you can give us some time, please contact the museum. I hope you've enjoyed today's presentation. Stay safe, stay cool, and thank you for watching.